This week on A to Z Running, we wrap up our series on challenging the search engine with our final question: what is effort-based running?
In the world of running, global marathon performance has shifted in the last 16 years, but the exact nature of that shift will shock you.
A generational achievement marked this year's Footlocker XC Championships. Will it prelude greater things to come?
Do you run in the morning or afternoon? Daniel Pink reminds us which is better and why.
All this and more on A to Z Running. Hey, welcome back to A to Z Running, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching services. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach, and you can find out everything you need to know about our services at AtoZrunning.com. And just a side note, because I mention it quite a bit later when we're talking about the world of running stuff, you also may want to be on our email list because we are sending out a super awesome, amazing, cool thing related to all the stats and fascinating figures around global marathon performance and how it has changed.
You're going to send that on an email? Cool.
Yes.
We barely ever send emails, so I'm glad to...
Why would you say that?
We don't often send emails. We want it to be something that you're going to be able to be fascinated by, or it's going to educate you. There's always like a very intentional purpose with it, so it's very seldom that we will send something out to you.
So what you're supposed to do, Andy, with email campaigns is not tell people whether or not you're going to send tons of emails, because you don't want to make a promise that you might not keep. Like, for instance, what if I decide to start sending more emails? Now I can't because you just told our audience that we don't. In any event, we are sending one at least. The point is, we're also going to be talking about some changes to our coaching services coming soon, and you want to know about those things. Mm-hmm. So there you go. And all of that can be found at AtoZrunning.com. The most important thing about our website is that the buttons along the top for the menu navigation are just about the only thing you need to know on our website, and they're all right there. So you'll find what you need on the menu at the top. And that is not the only place we share ideas and content. We are on Instagram, which is where the majority of our regular updates of content come from. And YouTube and Spotify are the best places to go to find the rest of what we do.
I'd say that mainly you'll want to be plugged into this podcast, because Instagram, sometimes I'll be posting, sometimes I won't, depending on the rhythm of life. And the reason for that is that we encourage all of you, and ourselves included, so we want to practice what we preach, to take times away from social media to focus on family. And
in other words, Andy goes through phases of hyper addiction with Instagram and can't stop looking at it, so then she has to delete it off her phone so that she will stop looking at it. I'm in a
state of delete it off my phone.
So currently it's deleted. Wait a couple weeks, it'll be back, and she'll post 20 or 50 times in a week, and then it'll be deleted again. So we'll just see. In other words, there are lots of places.
We're revealing lots of things in this podcast episode.
But you know that the best place to find what you want to know about the ideas we have to share is right here where you're at. This is what we do, and we love it. Talking with you about running stuff. And speaking of things we love, you may notice if you're watching the video. Oh, by the way, you definitely want to be watching the video today, even if you listen to it and then go back and watch it later, because I'm also going to be sharing some visuals in the world of running later.
Wow.
I'm actually going to put some charts and graphs on screen while talking about some of these things because they're just so amazing. So you don't want to miss that. But in the event that you do, you'll see the same visuals in the email that we're sending to our emailing list. And you might miss the hat that I am wearing right now.
It's a very cool hat.
It's what happens when you run the Whoville 5K, and there's a couple locations for the Whoville 5K. But we did that, and I dragged the boys along this time for the full 5K. They have never run a 5K before, and so I was like, let's do it. But it's nice to do it there because they also don't time it, and so there's no pressure of like, the boys tend to be a little bit competitive at times. And Miles was like, what's my time? As we're running. And I'm like, they don't time this, so we're not going to have a time. We're just going to enjoy it. And he did. DJ, not so much. But that's just what happens sometimes. So you can't win them all. But we did get some cool hats.
Yeah.
And hot chocolate.
I was sad to miss it.
And cookies.
I had music responsibilities.
And snowball fights.
it's a really cool event. So it's a fun run, but it's like ultra fun.
Yeah. It's the festive kind of thing. Everyone's dressed in costumes. We were wearing jingle bells strapped to our arms and legs all over, and so we were jingling loudly for all to hear the entire run. And unfortunately, with the way these things go, we were basically running around the same people the entire time. Like it's just this group of people who more or less were all running relatively the same pace the whole time. And so I feel badly for them because they probably couldn't even hear themselves think for the jingling, all the jingles. But we did jingle them bells all the way, and it was lots of fun. That's the moral of the story. It was an enjoyable time, and we were glad to do it. We saw a number of you there, and certainly we'll shout out again later, but shout out to Sarah and her son who ran together, and they did very well. They were blazing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, Cole had some goals. He timed himself, so that was it's
well
neat.
Done. Fun
family stuff.
Okay, so there you go. That's what we're up to these holiday times and winter times. We're doing the fun side of things, not so much the serious side of things in terms of training efforts, because this isn't the time of year when we do terribly serious things in training efforts, and that's the way we like it.
Mm-hmm. Now let's get started with a conversation about effort-based running.
If you've been tracking with us lately, we have been thinking about search engines a lot. In particular, just trying to get a sense for what the search engine tells us when we look for some of the more common things that runners are interested in. And I would say, I don't know if you agree, Andy, but overall, I would say that if you don't click past the first handful of things, you're probably going to get some decent information in any of these searches. The search engine seems to be producing good enough stuff most of the time. There have been some concerns with our own personal concerns with some of the responses to the questions. But
in general,
yeah. And that's kind of the way it goes, right? The point of the search engine is to try to bring you the stuff that other people are viewing. Now, because the search engine is also contrived by its algorithms, it's really not bringing you an honest, sincere look in general at what people find valuable on topics, because that's not the thing that makes the search engine produce its results. But either way, this is a way for us to find out the state of those responses, at least right now. I think our next endeavor should be to ask an AI chatbot a bunch of these questions.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not going to do it right away because it's too similar. You know, you want to take a break from this kind of a series. Mm-hmm. But maybe our next one is just we're going to chat with the AIs. Let's do it live. Let's chat with the AI live while we're recording and tell you what we're asking it and give you a chance to hear what it says and whether or not it says what you think it will. Oh, that's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I like it. Good idea.
In any event, this is where we're at. Our final episode in this current series is somewhat self-serving because it's a topic that we have particular interest in, and we'll share why in a moment. The question we asked the search engine, as Andy mentioned in our introduction, is what is effort-based running? And the two main reasons why we did this is because, one, it's the topic that has driven the most amount or the most significant adjustments to our own training and running endeavors individually as athletes, as well as how we coach our runners. Mm-hmm. And as a concept, it has informed many of the things that now define our philosophies and approaches, and arguably our successes as well.
And as we see our athletes flourish, we feel like it has helped them level up for better performances and greater enjoyment of the sport, which, as you know, and you've heard time and again, consistency over time yields the greatest results. And what helps you stay consistent? Overall balance and enjoyment. So being able to manage and thrive within your life, but also having the efforts correct is going to really help you feel better and do that better.
Right on. So we thought, why don't we try the search engine on this topic just to see what we would find and whether or not it aligns with our expectations of what might show up. So here we go. We're basically just going to pull the 5, as we like to do, the 5 first things that showed up in some sense or another. And in this particular sense, the first thing was not the general AI response. And I still have no idea why sometimes the AI response is the first thing and sometimes there is no AI response. I have no clue. Someone who understands Google better than me, explain that.
Yeah, because like sometimes I'll type in, I like, give me X amount of facts about this thing. So I'll say, give me 5 facts about Elf on the Shelf. And I would expect the AI, like I'm kind of hoping that the AI is going to give me a result for that. But instead it's like sending me Pinterest articles, you know? And it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what it's going to show me.
So you should just go to
Gemini,
GPT to Gemini, sure, but no one does that.
All the names of AI.
Yeah, just pick your favorite and use it. Well, who knows? But these are the 5, and it happens to be the case that none of them, that there was no AI response at all on this question. So maybe the AI just is not knowledgeable
Slacking
enough.
off on holiday.
Well, who knows? Okay, so first, the number 1 response was from the Canadian Running Magazine, which has been a source we often refer to for running news. It's one of the better outlets globally that just provides a good update on what's going on in the running world. We like it. This article,
more news.
News, yeah. This article is in their like training content section as opposed to news content section. And it's everything you need to know about effort-based running. Now, that's a bold claim because these kinds of titles always get me. Everything you need to know. Are you sure? Are you so confident? But of course, that's just, clickbaity stuff. They're not actually believing that you shouldn't ever know anything else about the topic.
They could also use a word like comprehensive review of effort-based training.
Yeah, sure. However, in the reality, this article is none of those things.
Okay.
They really only focus on one aspect of effort, like by design. They're just trying to talk about the concept of relative perceived effort. And so that was what they broke down. And for instance, quote, it's a scale that rates how intense a workout feels to you, usually from 1 to 10, with 1 being barely any effort and 10 being all-out sprint. That's the common vernacular of effort-based anything is the 1 to 10 scale. Everyone refers to it, it seems. Now, what's interesting is that everyone defines the scale differently, like what each of the steps are and how you know that you're doing that effort differently. If people just kind of apply their own, there's no shared definition of these things. And that's probably the result of the fact that it's the shared definition is the 1 through 10, and everyone just trying to describe it in a way that makes sense to them. But whatever the case may be, that's where they spent their time in this article. So for another example, and I quote, instead of chasing a specific pace, you're focusing on effort, which can help you tune into how your body feels rather than risking overloading it by trying to run a pace you can't manage. Great. Sounds good. The principal point of the article was to explain what this thing means and why this is valuable. They do talk about the difficulties, like because it's subjective, not everyone defines it the same way. There you go. And it tends to be difficult for those who are unfamiliar with it. Beginning runners struggle. And that is very much the case with something like this.
But that's the whole point, because we're trying to become more intuitive runners. So we have to practice these things. And if we are just beginning out running by effort, we're not going to do it properly all the time. But we begin to hone in on what efforts should feel like and therefore grow in maturity towards intuitive running. So I wouldn't expect a new runner to do it accurately, and that's okay. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, and it won't take them very long. In our experience, it is an easy thing to make that shift. And if someone is new to the sport, it's even easier because they don't have a foundation of always referring to their watch for everything, which is a harder habit to break than just starting fresh. So no, it's not really a concern in terms of trying to adopt this kind of approach. But it is true that some people feel like, oh, I don't really know if I'm getting it right, and they tend to kind of scrap it early.
And the ways that we lie to ourselves about what an effort is, like, oh, that was easy, but it really wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's also part of how we grow. And
sure
we
is.
are able to not only edify and grow athletically, but also learn to have more honesty in our self-talk.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve Magnus recently posted, I think you can't just get this by searching online, For free, he is sharing his 100-page guide to coaching, and it's comprehensive and it's packed. It's 100 pages that are very full. But I don't know exactly how you're going to be able to get it, except for if you buy one of his books, he'll also send that to you for free.
We bought a lot of his books.
We have.
Does it count in retrospect?
So I have gotten this for free, but
oh, you have, okay.
Yes, but as it were, significant percentage of this writing, 100 pages worth of it, is spent on the mental side of developing an athlete, and in particular, things like understanding those kinds of internal biases, those kinds of mismatch theory, pragmatic scenarios, and all of it points back to stuff like this, like how easy it is for us to lie to ourselves about whether or not we should be doing the thing we're doing to the degree we're doing it. And that's the truth.
Oh, I liked that little side trail that we just went on, although it was not really about
that. That was not in that article. No.
But we want to be able to flesh out our thoughts as we are reading and gathering this information. So those were just some of our thoughts.
Yeah. So my impression overall of that article was it was just a kind of a quick glimpse at the more common vernacular that people are referring to when they're talking about this concept, and didn't give you a lot to figure it out if you're trying to adopt it, but maybe get you started. Sure. Next up on the list was their suggested questions thing, which I don't generally spend much time with, except for that one of them struck me as very odd because I had no idea why this was coming up as a suggested question based on my prompt. But it said, it was the number 2 suggestion. It said, what is the 30-30 method of running? And I saw that and I thought, I read 80-20 when I saw it because those are just the numbers that you see most commonly when someone says the 80-20 method or something like that. And no, this was 30-30. And what it actually is it's just a workout strategy. It is not a training approach. So I was a little bit disappointed that it wasn't more in depth.
But it was interesting because it's a Lydiard workout that we do with our athletes too, but it's sharpening before races.
Yeah, we don't actually do it anymore, interestingly enough.
Ish. We do something of essence.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, but not really. Because as a workout, what Lydiard did, this was a long time ago. We're talking about 70 years ago. He came up with this workout himself where he wanted runners to just be sharpening and refining, but not fatiguing themselves. So he actually would do this workout the day before and the day after. Like it was in between 2 other harder effort runs. And so it was not supposed to be the kind of thing that taxed you a ton, but it definitely was not easy at the same time. And how did he go about that? He would have his runners run 1 mile on a track where they would there's 2 variations of it. Either they would power down the straights and then float the curves. And float does not mean jog. Float means just a good steady effort. And so you're hitting the straight, steady around the curve, hit the straight, steady around the curve for 1 mile. So you're essentially doing a hard mile.
I've done this workout before, but you're right. We don't do this with our athletes.
No, we do not. And then the other variation is 50-meter chunks, which is even harder, by the way, because now you're talking about changing pace every straight halfway through. You start with a power it, and then halfway through you ease off to float, and then you hit the curve and you immediately start up again. And you do that for a whole mile. Actually, sometimes he would do it up to 2K, which is 5 laps on the track, so a little more. And that is not an easy workout. And you feel like you have really done some serious work until about 2 minutes after the workout, and then you're like, oh, I actually feel totally fine now.
But I do think, too, the idea that it's on a track for some of us that have, degenerative hips, it did make me, I would do much better if I did something on the trail or on the road, because just the amount of changing of speeds with the nature of the track, I don't know.
Interesting.
I do remember being sore with my hips after that workout.
Yeah, that was for other reasons though, because that's when your hip stuff was pretty bad. But as it were, we don't use this workout anymore, in part because it was really hard for people to get it right because it's a very strange workout to do. And so as they're talking about this here, they're actually talking about this as a strategy to do all interval workouts. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. I would not do it, but I thought it was kind of fascinating. No idea why it showed up in this query because it had nothing to do with effort-based running. Well, in theory, it kind of does because they talk about higher and lower efforts over the course of the workout, but they're not at all referring to the concept. So who knows? But it was fascinating. All right. Next up then, after the suggested questions, was another article. This one, once again, from an unlikely source. And it came from the Cifuentes coaching website, which is Nicole Cifuentes, a Canadian Olympian, who is now also doing coaching and consulting work. And the article was Effort-Based Running, a Real-Life Example. And so she basically explained the concept and then gave an example from a situation, a scenario with an athlete, and kind of like laid it out in the way that you would expect, which is the assignment for the training is to do a degree of effort for a certain time, which is exactly the way we do it. This is how effort-based training in general should look if people are doing it to the degree that they're trying to be focused on the effort. They're going to give you an amount of time to run. Some still use distance, but very few do. They'll give you an amount of time to run, and they tell you how much effort to give. And sometimes the effort's not the same over the course of the whole run. Like you're going to do something like intervals or something like, some amount of easy running, then a period of time harder running, then easy running, things like that. But anyway, that was the structure. She gave an example and talked about how, and this is the key takeaway, how the runner is not running the same pace on various different days that have the same effort.
Yeah.
And so one day the pace was like 8:10 and another day it was like 8:50 and they were supposed to be the same effort. And she's saying that's the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
That is not a fault. That is, or rather it's not a bug, but it's a feature of the system. And her claim ultimately was, and this is a bold claim, runners who know how to train, I'm quoting, train based on effort are way more likely to achieve their potential in races because they have the ability to ride the line without going too hard too soon, and they have the confidence to push hard when their body is feeling great, capitalizing on the days when everything falls into place.
We agree.
Yeah, I kind of want to see some stats. Like, I want to find people who have spent time studying this. There aren't a ton of studies that are substantial enough to make that kind of a claim, but we're pretty confident that it's true. Instinctually and anecdotally, we're pretty confident that that is true. And clearly Nicole Cifuentes agrees, although she's not the only one. We have talked with other professional runners as well as other coaches who feel the same way, which is to say that the effort-based training and effort-based racing, when you do that as the way you do the running thing, you're probably going to be able to get more out of your body than if you don't.
Mm-hmm. And that's why people have to just really be able to transition and try racing without a watch too, because some people will, okay, I can train that way. But then they get towards their race, they start getting nervous. They're like, I want some proof that I can do this goal pace that I have. And then in the race, they decide to go by pace because they want it so bad. And then it ends up either limiting them or it ends up being a scenario where they go out too hard. Mm-hmm. So or their anxiety is high because of the mismatch theory when they're training without good GPS signal. There's just a variety of variables. So anyway, you got to follow it through. Yeah. Try to make it the goal to be able to race by effort.
Yeah, and it's really not. So the main reason that we hear why people say I can't do that or I'm not comfortable doing that is because it feels like I'm going to get it wrong. But the point is you're better able to get it right. If you train that way, you know what your body feels like, you know what exertion feels like at different degrees of effort, you're going to be able to get it right. Maybe not every single time, but you will. And that's not a maybe. It's eventually, ultimately, you will. And so, are you willing to put it to the test? The principal point that Cifuentes makes is that's how you should start. It is if you're trying to figure this thing out and you want to do effort-based running, that the first step is to run without a watch.
That's why Zach liked this article so much.
I did like that part of it. I actually didn't see this part of it until the very end, though, so I wouldn't say that I. Anyway, so it was the principal point. If you're going to try this, run without a watch first. and feel how you feel. And that is the key, because it does not take long to generate a kind of instinct around how much am I exerting, how much should I be exerting, how much more or less can I exert, things like that. So that was a pretty sound article, and you only had to get 3 clicks in to get a pretty poignant addressing of the topic. And now this is coming from someone who has spent time on both sides of it, doing this themselves and doing this with others and helping them do it. And you see that in the nature of the writing, and that's always encouraging. So number 4. Now, this again, I've never seen this in a search, and I'm just wondering if it's like some new update to the algorithm and how it's going to do things, because instead of just having Reddit be number 4, which it has been for all of our previous posts, basically, it was not. It was a section, much like the suggested questions section, that said discussion forums. And then it had a list of a few of them. All of them were Reddit, except for one. They're just all different Reddit posts. One was Let's Run, which that should never be allowed to show up as a result of a search engine, because you never know what you're going to get there, and it's probably not going to be good for your soul. But
well, there's a lot of good Let's Run articles, but their discussion forums, their message boards can be a place that are a little vicious.
It's the place where all good things go to die, as we so often say. Here's the thing. You might get some good substance in a Let's Run message board, but you have to dig through the refuse piles of humanity to find it, and it's not worth it.
Is it going to make you a little angry?
Or disgusted, or annoyed, or all the things. These people. And they just think that they're awesome, these Let's Run message boarders. All right, so anyway.
I'm sure some of you are listening right now, and it's okay. We live in it.
Hey, listen, I post on Let's Run's message board. I think it's fun. But I try to post productively.
Productive,
positively.
nice, positive things.
Well, anyway, there are plenty of gems. It's just,
You're all the gems.
It's
people.
A comment section. So
and if you're not, go be the gem.
Point is, this Reddit question was the first discussion forum suggestion that came up. So we clicked on that one. And it was effort versus pace was the question. And the questioner said, I'm in my early training for first marathon. Great. I did a marathon pace session today, my first one, on the treadmill. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not a great idea in general. And here are my paces, and I reduced the pace throughout because I was trying to maintain my heart rate. And so I had to, and this is how it goes, right? Your heart rate's going to progressively rise over the course of an effort, of any kind of effort, unless the effort is itself below a certain point. But any kind of effort that's moderately aerobic or higher, your heart rate's going to progressively rise over the course of the effort. It's by design, actually. So that's what happened here. And naturally, the person had to slow down to keep the effort, because the person's goal was to keep the same effort the whole time, judged by a heart rate monitor. And the commenters...
It was the worst comment.
They were not super helpful. They were not very helpful to this person. One, because the first commenter was like, just, on your easy days, use your heart rate, make sure you're running easy, that's great. But on your quality days, never use a heart rate. Forget it, because on your race day, all you're trying to do is run a pace, not heart rate. I'm like, okay, that's not good advice. Don't do that. Don't ignore that comment. And then the very next few comments were like supportive of that. Like, yeah, do it like that. And they seem to think, these posters seem to think that the only thing you're doing on race day is running a pace, and that's the way it has to be. And of course, that's not true. But also, the idea that you should just ignore your heart rate on certain types of runs, if you're wearing a heart rate monitor and you're trying to train by heart rate, you should not just throw it out the door on certain kinds of runs, because you're almost definitely going to get that wrong at some point. And there were some other commenters that came in and they were like, hold on a second. It's not a good idea.
This isn't even about like your effort-based training either, so it didn't really hit the mark.
No.
So this discussion did not do a good job of highlighting effort versus pace.
It became a big debate about when and when not to use a heart rate. And it was either you're going to use heart rate or pace. And naturally, what ends up happening in this kind of situation is people we've said this before, either people laser focus on one specific detail, and so they give a very insubstantial response. Or they do the opposite, where they just pour an entire book into a single comment, and it's like they wrote about everything and any related topic. In this one, we got most of the former and not much of the latter, but also just not much of what our original query was. So missed the point, I guess, but it was an interesting read. And number 5, and the last one that we'll share, because we only ever go 5 deep, because that's probably as far as anyone's going when they're Googling anything. This one was actually surprising to us because we are friends with the people who run the website.
And Kaylin Russo is a previous podcast guest, too.
In fact.
So our friend and previous podcast guest.
So Kaylin Russo Fitness is the source, and Kaylin Russo and her husband Alex are our friends and runners and coaches, and they happen to also use this approach of training, which we have had the great pleasure. This is how this goes, right? We've known the Russos since college, and we've had the great pleasure of being able to kind of encounter each other occasionally over the years and kind of like see both in both of each other, them and us and them, our evolution over the years as athletes and as well as coaches, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat. All right. So this article posted by Kaylin was effort-based running versus pace running. And what she's doing here, she's essentially writing about her own experience moving toward effort-based running.
And her athletes, to explain to them why they'll see effort-based training.
Yep. The big takeaways are the common considerations that you need to make sure you have in mind. Listening to your body, adjusting because of conditions, making sure that you're giving the right effort, not trying to run a certain result. She also goes into explaining how different levels of effort should look, like that 1 to 10 scale. She uses the conversation test for all of them. So here's how much you should be able to talk. And the reason why that is a common way to define running efforts is because breathing rate and heart rate are very closely related, which are lag measures, results of the things that you're doing exertionally. And so it's not a terrible way to do so. It just becomes another kind of way to tell objectively, if you could. It's not perfect, but she doesn't claim that it is here.
And her point that we like to cheer for, because we say it all the time too, understanding the goal and the purpose of the workout. When you run by effort, you really do need to understand what you want the result to be from this thing. So we love that. That's great.
That's cool. Yeah. So shout out Kaylin and Alex.
Woo-hoo.
Awesome stuff. Hope you guys are healthy. All right. So what ends up happening at this point in time is we zoom out and we say, okay, do we feel like we got the answer we were hoping for? Or more to the point, do we feel like we got good information on the topic that we were asking? And the answer I would give is, in general, is yes. But there's one thing, and I don't know if the reason why we never encounter this is because I'm stating the same thing in other words that is unnecessary. Like, am I just using too many ways of describing something? But there's a concept here in effort-based running that I feel like is underrepresented in any conversations we've had and any sources we've read. And that is that everyone talks about knowing you're giving the right effort because of how you're feeling, because of how you're responding to how you're feeling, some of those things. And in my mind, that still is one step away from what you're actually trying to be as a runner. You're not trying to be reactionary to the circumstances, because that still means then that if you make a mistake, you only know once it's already been made, right? You only know you've made a mistake because you're feeling the consequences of that mistake. And in my mind, that's too late. Like, it's still good because you can make adjustments. It's not too late in the sense that you can't recover from that. But is there not a more direct goal of the point? And here's what I would say it is, if there is. I'm curious Andy's reaction. She's looking at me like, where are you going with this? And that is, I want as a runner to know how much to exert, to know how much I can exert without having any information about how I'm going to feel as a result of it. I want to know what I can do exertionally to produce a manageable result in all circumstances. So when it comes to race day, and especially, for instance, in a marathon, I really don't want to be making choices in a marathon based on how I'm feeling, because I'm going to feel really good in the beginning, hopefully. And then what ends up happening for marathoners is we go through these weird waves of like, I'm not feeling great for a bit, but then I felt a little bit better, like a second wind type of thing, right? Or I'm running up hills and then I'm on flat and I feel very differently in those two phases. And the results of responding to how I'm feeling may, well, go back to mismatch theory. I have these conceptions, and sometimes they're misconceptions in my head when I'm feeling certain ways. It's generating a kind of bias. I want to be making decisions like, I know how much I can exert right now. I don't need to know how I'm going to feel as a result of it yet, because I know what I can do in terms of how much effort I can give. And that's not necessarily saying that's an infallible thing. You can still end up not being able to do a thing that you thought you were able to do. But I feel like you can make better decisions on that side of it.
In reaction to that, I think a lot of that is having experience and being able to practice things, because knowing that those waves do come, that doesn't change how much effort you need to use. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to back off. One of the tips that I give practical tips for race day to my athletes very often. Just a couple things to think about, a couple things to plan through. But oftentimes when you do have that like slump that you're talking about, that ebb and flow, you could feel better if you slow down a little bit. You also could feel better if you run faster. And it's actually less about your systems, like aerobic system and your effort, and more about what you need neuromuscularly. So giving 10 quick, light steps might be better than slowing down. So I think that being able to pair effort-based running with also your ability to have that brain-body connection and know what you need neuromuscularly, that's an important piece of the puzzle. But I do know what you're saying, like knowing what you can input. But sometimes there are things that start fatiguing, and there are things you do need to adjust and not just plow through. I just think that it's good to put that information together, thinking about it beforehand. And so you're not as reactionary because you've thought through every scenario and how to overcome them, as Alicia Munson says.
True that. So go ahead.
I have one more thing that wasn't discussed in any of these articles, I don't think. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think is important as we've discussed effort-based running and training, that the percentage of effort that is supposed to be given for a run is not necessarily always what you start out at. It's the percentage of effort that you have used by the end of that run. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that's usually discussed. That's how we do it. Maybe that's not how other coaches do it, but we think that's an important factor, because if we're saying that you're supposed to have this tempo run and go 80% effort, you can't start at 80% effort when you're running 2 hours at that. It's by the end you've given 80% effort.
And it's relative to that distance. And that's the piece. We didn't really spend too much time reacting to it, but that 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 rating scale thing, we don't personally use that because it has so many ways of being fallible. But also, it's too confusing for a runner to try to think about that when they're trying to execute the thing. I want you focused on your exertions, not on, is this a 1 or a 2 or is this a 4 or a 6 or those kinds of things. And one of those layers of confiscation is, as Andy just described, that depending on the distance you're running, then the degree of effort versus the maximum is going to feel differently. 80% effort for a 1 mile run is a lot higher effort than 80% effort for a 10-mile run. And also, beyond that if you were to say, I want this to be an 80% effort, I'm just going to use that example again. I want this to be an 80% effort, then the answer is not you're giving 80% of your effort the entire time. It goes back to that Redditor's actually question. They touched on something that unfortunately no one that we saw responded to in the comments, but the fact that your heart rate was going up and you had to slow down the pace in order to keep it steady tells you all you need to know about how our systems work. And that's what Andy was just describing.
Right.
Your level of exertion over time becomes closer to percent of maximum the longer you go at that level of exertion.
Right. which would be end up being maintaining.
Yep.
So like you're going to be running, if you're looking at your pace, you're going to be running the same pace, but increasing effort as you go further and further into your marathon because you're fatiguing. So that's why we think that there is a gap in the conversation, because none of that was discussed.
No, Cifuentes touched on it in a way when she was talking about one of the run examples for their workout schedule, but she didn't go into the explanation of why that was a relevant factor. Okay. But she was talking about how in some of the runs, they specifically told people to have this effort scale at this point and this effort scale later on and move up to it. But the point is not that you're accelerating over the course. That's not why the effort scale is changing. It's because you have to increase your degree of effort in order to maintain that same pace, right? That's the factor of pace that keeps coming up with these things is a pace at the beginning of the run and a pace at the end of the run is a different degree of effort. And that's why we throw out pace, because it complicates the whole thing. But anyway, you see that these things are not straightforward. And we really enjoy how, when we can dig into it like this and go onto the Googles and see what the search engine has to say. It's a lot of fun to generate that. What am I learning here, and what am I missing here, and where else can I find this information? Mm-hmm. I love it. This is good stuff. So maybe next time we try to these kinds of things, we'll go to the AI chatbots and we'll see if they can generate a different kind of experience for us, which no doubt they will. It'll be fun.
Well, thanks for joining us on this series. We're going to move on now to the latest news and updates from the world of running.
To start, we have the latest update from the AtoZrunning group. Craig ran the Gulf Coast Marathon, and Sarah ran the Whoville 5K with family. Lots of fun. It's always the festive holiday races that bring out the whole family, and we enjoy those things immensely. We were there as well, as mentioned earlier. So nice work all, and this essentially is marking just about the last of the racing for 2024. So we're getting close to the end of the year, and we just love end of year reflections. So we've got some of that in store for you here, and more to come in the next couple of weeks as well. Starting off first globally now is how has marathoning changed in the last several Olympic cycles. So we teased this in the introduction because I first stumbled upon an article from Tony Rivas about how marathoning has changed in the last 8 years. His article entitled Reconfiguring Marathon Excellence in 2024. And that in particular focused on just over the course of the last 8 years, what from 2016 to 24 has changed and how that's looked, and just the quality of marathoning and how it has improved globally. He gave some statistics that we've been seeing floating around, like 3 to 4% improvement for the women, things like that. We're going to talk about that, but what I found as I was looking at his statistics is I wanted more, and so I went out and got more. So Tony Rivas inspired what became a deep dive into the global marathoning scene from 2008 to 2024. Why 2008, you say? Because we wanted to get a full picture of what marathoning looked like pre-Super Shoes and post-Super Shoes, and we needed enough data to show trends. And so I went as far back as I felt like was necessary. I can certainly go back further in future installments of this reflection, but for now, and here's what I ended up doing. Because I found this so interesting, I spent a fair bit of time not just finding information and drawing some conclusions, but I put together some charts and graphs, some visuals, and produced quite a bit more content than what you're about to see or hear on this episode. And so if you'd like the full deep dive, it's really something. Global marathoning performance from 2008 to 2024. What you need to do is you either need to find it on AtoZrunning.com under our articles section, or if you'd prefer, we'll send it right to you, because depending on when you're listening to this, on December 21st, we are going to send this complete deep dive article to all our subscribers. That's a Saturday. And so if you hear this before that date, then go to atozrunning.com/subscribe and we'll send it to you. And if you can't find it or you don't remember what I just said, go to atozrunning.com And you'll find somewhere in there to follow us. There's a button at the top that says follow. You'll also find it in the article section. You're certainly welcome to just do that if you don't want to get the email directly to your inbox. It is interesting. And so I'm going to give you some of it right now. And you want to get the full article if this is something that intrigues you. So in reviewing the data, a lot of different things stood out, but most significantly is how substantial the improvement in global marathoning has been in the last 4 years. And how substantial is especially obvious relative to multiple Olympic cycles for the last, in this case, 2008 to 2024. And so a couple of quick general things. The overall improvement from 2016 to 2024 was double that of 2008 to 2016 for men. So 2 times greater or faster improvement in those 8-year periods. But for the women, it was 3 times more improvement from 2016 to 24 versus 2008 to 2016. And that is incredible. 3 times the rate of improvement in an 8-year period of time. And what does that actually mean by the numbers? Let's talk about that. Start with the women here for a moment, because this is so incredible. Elite women improved by, I should give you my methodology first, shouldn't I? So how did I come up with this information? Did I look at every single performance? Did I look at just a general average? I looked at a lot of things. So we started by just trying to see what were the top 10 fastest times. And then I thought, that only gives you one kind of look at the picture. I want to try to look at a few different points of data. And so I looked at the 10th fastest time, the 25th fastest time, the 50th, and the 100th. For both men and women, for each of the years in question, entered all of these data, and then was able to generate some trends. And then I also looked at how many women ran under certain benchmark times, 225, 220, things like that. And 218 was the fastest one. And then for the men, similarly, 208, 206, 204. And the reason for those numbers, by the way, came from, I took the 100th fastest time in certain years and then based these benchmarks off of that. So what's 99% of that time look like, or what's 95% of that time look like, things like that. And so that's how we came up with those benchmarks. So even though the women's gaps, 225 versus 220 and things like that, the men's gaps are representative of similar saturation of runners. And so even though the gaps were narrower, there are more men running closer together, is essentially what that means. So then that's what I did. And there were a few other things. I generated percent improvements by year, by 4-year, by 8-year, and from 08 to 2024. And so looked at a few different ways of seeing that rate of improvement, put it together in some charts and graphs. Actually, let me throw one up on the screen here for you. So if you're watching right now, you should be watching because you get more from the show. But if you're not watching, then you're going to have to hear me describe it. If you're watching right now, you're going to see this. This is one of the graphs that I will share with you in the article when we send it out. And this one's looking at, for the women, those 3 different benchmark times and how many quantity of runners ran under those times. And you can see when we start looking on the far left-hand side and we have the low numbers of 2008, you can see things like, under 218, no women were running under 218. And as a matter of fact, statistically, no women were really running under 218. Obviously, the world record was, Paula Radcliffe's record was under that, and a few things here and there. But it was not until 2022 when a statistically notable number of women in a single year ran under 218. And yet, by 2024, it's a large handful, like substantially greater numbers. But what's even more dramatic, what becomes apparent here, is looking at how many women ran under 225 and just watching the line skyrocket from 2020 to 2024, like astronomical improvements. You get a little bit of rising and falling over the years, but then once the super shoes hit the market, it just goes crazy. It's really something. So you got to see that. If you're not able to watch the podcast, at least you can subscribe, get the article, because you'll be able to get all these charts and visuals, and they're interactive, by the way. So you can actually the chart is not just an image embedded, so you can see those numbers more clearly. So here's a few highlights. This is incredible. Elite women improved by 4 to 5% from 2008 to 2024. That is basically 7.5 minutes. 7.5 minutes global marathoning improvements. And elite men was about 2%, which is about 3 minutes. They were about half, just under half the rate of improvement of the women, which is really something. We can talk about why. That's probably a little bit more of a different conversation. But you can see that level of improvement is just incredible. In 2008, the 10th fastest time by a woman was 2:24:27, the 10th fastest in the world in the year 2008. Not ever, but just in that year, was 2:24:27. In 2024, Sarah Hall broke the U.S. Masters marathon record. You recall we just reported on this in Valencia. She ran the 6th fastest time ever by an American. By an American that year. Got to get my numbers right. The 6th fastest time by an American that year, she ran 2:23:45. Look at the difference. 10th globally was 2:24:27, and then Sarah Hall ran a Masters record and only the 6th fastest in the U.S. in 2:23:45. She was 10th in that race, and it was faster than top 10 in the world. Her time, this is where you get the dramatic comparison. 2:23:45 in 2024 was good for 100th in the global list this year. 100th, and it was 10th 16 years ago. So, do the multiplication here for a moment. How many times does that place double before you get to it? It's really something. 10th fastest time in the world in 2024 for men was 2:16:58. 2:16:58, almost 8 minutes faster than the 10th fastest time in 2008. No, that's not right. Sorry, for the women. I'm still talking about the women. Okay, so 2024, the 10th fastest time for women was 2:16:58. Almost 8 minutes faster than the 2:24 in 2008. So you can see that level of improvement we described. The top 10 women are running times now that nobody was running for years. It's only been in the recent history that anyone's been running that fast, and we're talking about you're only 10th on the performance list with that time. In 2008, about 25%, this is still women, in 2008, about 25% of the top 100 were East African, and 10% were Chinese at that. In 2024, 80% of the top 100 were East African, and 0 Chinese runners were in the top 100. So in 16 years, you can see the global demographic shift in where the centralized competitiveness is as well. And that's not surprising at all. The development of East African nations in terms of accessibility, more people have access to opportunities to train and compete, but also for women in particular, that development has been more recent historically, only really in the last couple of decades. And so you see that reflected in the marathoning performances. So there's a few examples for the women's statistics for you, just to get a sense of how dramatic this is. On the men's side, from 2008 to 2015, so in that stretch before 2016, a total of 8 men total ran under 2:04. For 7 years, only 8 men ran under 2:04. In 2024, 10 men did it in that 1 year. And 10 men ran under 2:05 in a single race in 2024, which is just, you look at the comparison, it's not even close. How about this? In 2008, 29 men ran under 2:08. 29 ran under 2:08. And in 2024, 24 men did that in one race. And 172 total. So again, do the multiplication here. How many times more men are running fast times? It's really something. In 2008, the gap between 10th and 100th was 4 minutes. In 2024, it's narrowed to 3 minutes, a 25% decrease in the gap, which is telling you what's going on here. The fastest are certainly getting faster, but everyone's getting faster and everyone's catching up to the fastness as well. And I say everyone, but that's not exactly true, because there's interesting information in the demographic breakdowns. For instance, there was 1 American in the top 100 in 2008 and 1 American in the top 100 in 2024. But the difference was Ryan Hall was ranked 9th in the world in 2008, and Bia Simbasa was ranked 97th. In 2024. The top-ranked American went from 9th to 97th in 16 years. That's kind of sad for Americans. But how about this? There were about 4 times more Kenyans than Ethiopians in 2008. 67% of the top 100, so 67 of the top 100 runners in 2008 were Kenyan, and 15 of them were Ethiopian. 16 years later, in 24, Kenya was 38 of the top 100 runners, and Ethiopia 32. So it's almost essentially balanced out. What's incredible is the total number between the two actually remained just about the same. You go from 60... oh, no, that's not right. The total number is about as many as there were Kenyans previously. So the total number's gone down some, and you see that reflected primarily by the increase in European runners in the top 100. In 2008, there were 4, and in 2024, there were 11. And so that basically is a 1-to-1. And there's a slight few others as well. And what that amounts to is just a glimpse of how marathoning has changed in only 16 years. And we can see that 2 essential things have happened as we look at these numbers and data. For the men and the women, 2 essential things have happened. Technology has changed how fast people can run. And I don't mean that in an over cynical sense, but the literal sense. Like, individuals can run faster at a given level of fitness simply by the increase in the technology. And that's 2 things. The technology is 2 things. 1 is the shoes and that type of stuff. 2 is the race courses and what they're doing with the race courses. There are just more race courses now that are producing faster times. Or at least the race courses, the newer fast ones, are producing especially fast times, like Valencia. Beyond that, though, we also see that because of the nature of the competitiveness, certain key developments have produced higher saturations of fast runners. And so on the one side for women, it's things, especially things like the development of nations where women were not actively participating in things like running or competition, things like that, until more recently historically. And that's affected the saturation of the demographic saturation of high performance. But in the same token, you see that because of the technologies, more runners from more places are performing at higher levels too. And so the overall growth in global marathoning has been across the board. It's been everywhere. And then it's reflected from the top down, and the very fastest are getting quite a bit faster at that. So what's interesting, what I find especially interesting, is when you compare world records, you see that the world record is reflecting a very similar combination of improvements as the rest of things. If on average the women's times have improved about 7.5 minutes, the women's world record has also improved close to that. 6 minutes in this instance, but there's 2 anomalies there. The one is Paula Radcliffe's record was an anomaly. Her record was set in 2003, and so it's far predates even the data that we're looking at here. But also Ruth Chepngetich record is an anomaly, and so when you cross-reference those anomalies, what were people running previously, aside from Paula Radcliffe, what were people running now? Then you see that the fastest women improved a little bit less than the critical mass of women. And so take out the anomalies. And so that means that you see something like a 5 to 6 minute rate of improvement across the board in women's global marathoning. And for the men, it's actually a similar kind of thing. You look at, it's about 3 minutes for the men in general rate of improvement. And the men's world record has improved about 3 minutes since 2008. And so it has followed the trend quite a bit, which tells us on the women's side, there's a little bit more of an anomaly potential, which is not surprising because of some of those factors described. Things like access to the sport, which has been highly disparate for women. It's not surprising that a country like Great Britain would have greater success earlier historically than a country like Kenya because of the nature of access to sport and things like that. But in the same token, we also see a number of things like various negative trends that have influenced some of these things. China had 10% of the top 100 marathon performers in 2008, and a significant percentage of high-level Chinese athletes have been disciplined for during this period of time, the 90s through the early 2000s, disciplined for rules violations, predominantly doping and things like that. And so then you see fewer Chinese athletes now than you did then. And you wonder if some of it is that those were artificially boosted numbers. And the same question has been raised currently, where on the women's side, is it possible that some of those numbers are artificially boosted currently because of such wide-scale doping violations in certain particular countries, as it were. And so we see that in a lot of different ways as well, other events. We're just looking at the marathon right here. But what I see here is just two things we always say. One is it's incredible time to be a fan of the sport because things are improving so much right now. And yes, a technological breakthrough is mostly to credit for that. It's true. But in reality, it's still exciting and it's still happening. And it's kind of a resetting of the norm. But now you get, and the other side of this is you get a global perspective, historical global perspective of just how much things are changing as a result of some of this kind of stuff. And it's incredible. It's really something. So subscribe, AtoZrunning.com/subscribe, so you get the full article with all the graphs and charts. It's very incredible stuff. Okay, let's talk about number 2 on our list here, which is Footlocker Cross Country National Championships, the last of the high school cross country championships. And now that we're most of the way through December, it's nice to say that cross country is done. But in this particular instance, we've got two notable dynamics here to report. On the one side of the girls' race, Elizabeth Leachman defended her title, which marks only the 6th girl to repeat in the Footlocker Cross Country Championships. Repeat title, 6th ever. And this meet's been going on for a long time, like 40 or 50 years. And so that also means that we essentially have kept up the trend. It's a very interesting trend. There's been a girl to repeat as the Footlocker champion essentially once every decade. In the 90s, it was like 1990 and then 98 were the two different ones that repeated. So technically it was 2 in one decade, but they were very close together, or very far apart. And so Leachman now, the first to repeat since 2017, and also setting herself up to potentially be the first girl ever to win 3 titles in Footlocker cross country, because she is only a junior. She still has 1 more year left of high school. So we'll see how that proceeds, whether that proceeds, and how she does with that. But in any event, it was very exciting. Leachman won. It was a very strong race. She did it the same way she did last year. Somebody else did some of the early work, and then she had the second half of the race charge that preceded her victory. So, and a quick side note, Victoria Garces was second again. She was second at Nike Cross Nationals and second at Footlocker. So unfortunately, as a senior, she won't have another chance at it. Just missing that coveted national champion title in cross country. But 2 back-to-back second place finishes is not bad at all. For the girls' race, there were only 3 seniors in the top 10, so a lot will be returning next year, including Leachman herself. And there were 2 freshmen in the race. There's only 40 accepted to the Footlocker National Championships, 40 of all the national cross-country runners. And so there were 2 freshmen amongst those 40, which is really impressive. And they were finished in 32nd and 36th. So we'll be watching for them in years to come, potentially. On the boys' race, Tamrat Gavenas was the champion, as also the top returner. Not a surprising victory. He was 3rd last year, came back for the victory this year as a senior, and marking the first of 8 seniors to cross the line in a row. And so there are going to be some new faces certainly next year, as the top 8 finishers will not be returning. And there were not very many young names on the list to begin with. There were only 2 sophomores and no freshmen. The 2 sophomores finished in 11th, which was, by the way, Johannes van Meerten, and we'll see how he does in years to come. He's got a couple more years left, and he's already just about a top 10 finisher, which is impressive. And then 34th was the other one. So we've got exciting years ahead, as always, with the youngsters, and it's interesting to follow their careers. One general reflection, which is kind of strange as you think about it, but in terms of Footlocker national champions, it is often the case that the boys national champion, the Footlocker champion, tends to be a notable figure in collegiate competition and potentially beyond. It's often the case that those Footlocker champions go on to be top-level collegians and enter the pro scene in some capacity. However, That is often not the case on the girls' side. Not to say that it hasn't been at all, but it is less often so for the girls than it is for the boys. And so it's a little bit more volatile. And how will Leachman perform, for instance, in the collegiate scene as she finishes up high school? She's already holds records, high school track records, and so already made a name for herself at that level, and we're always hopeful that she can continue it on. All right, last up for the world of running, I did want to talk about some research, and this has come up a number of times. It's relevant always, but I just stumbled upon yet another resource from Daniel Pink, and his newsletter, which goes out every month or so, every couple of weeks sometimes. His newsletter often contains some references to research he's done on a few of different key topics. One of them is motivation, which we've shared some of his work on that. Another one is timing, and he has researched his book When, which is about the scientific something or other of perfect timing. His book identifies things like, are there certain times of day that's better or worse to exercise, and things like that. And he shared his top reasons for morning exercise as well as his top reasons for afternoon exercise. And of course, according to the research, the answer is, well, it depends on what you're after in terms of which is best. But I wanted to share those reasons with you here because it helps us make better decisions when we have these kinds of things in mind, and they're interesting. By the way, you can find this summary on YouTube. He shared it via his newsletter, if you're familiar with Daniel Pink's website and the Pink Cast, which is not called that anymore, I guess, but his video series, and he's got it on YouTube as well. So this one in particular, I guess the video was titled When to Exercise, in case, when should you exercise, in case you want to find it yourself. His 4 reasons for exercising in the morning. What are the advantages? First, weight loss. Now, this is tricky, and we'll talk about why, but weight loss, because you, by the research, seem to be able to burn more fat in the morning. That's not terribly surprising because if your body has less available sugar, glucose, then it's going to need to burn something else for fuel. And so you see more fat adaptation in terms of fat burning for fuel in the morning than you do other times of day because of that reason. That can be dependent on things like whether you work out fasted, which is generally not advisable for anything except for brief low intensity exercise. And the other side of it too is that it has something to do with speeding up your metabolism, and so it's possible that you burn more fat as a result of that. However, when you look into the research, there are other converse studies that show, while it may be true that you might burn more fat after exercising in the morning or during exercise in the morning, your blood sugar content might be different if you exercise in the afternoon versus the morning. And so I'm not going to try to go into that here. Daniel Pink does not go into that in his video either. But I spent some time looking through studies because that's what I do. And I hear people making these claims and I think, what else is out there? And there's a lot to be said on both considerations. Now, his second reason for morning exercise is mood boosting. Because cardio exercise in particular gives us a kind of mood boost. We know this to be true. As he says in the video, it also lasts quite a while, hours. And as a result, if you do that in the morning, then you have throughout the day mood boost. If you do that in the afternoon or evening, then your mood boost only lasts until you go to bed, or you don't need a mood boost because you're just hanging out after that, watching some shows or doing a little bit of work and then going to bed. So anyway, whatever it may be, the mood boost in the morning is probably more beneficial, but it's probably hormone related when we look at why there's a mood boost from exercise in general. And the answer is most likely something to do with hormones, and that's going to come up quite a bit, and we don't want to forget about it. How about reason number 3? Because morning exercisers tend to keep their routine more consistently. In other words, they are more likely to exercise as intended if they are morning exercisers. And we know the reason why, because there's just fewer likely interruptions. If you're going to wake up before work or before the kids or before school to exercise, there's generally nothing else going on at that time. Like no one's going to say, hey, before you go out the door to do your run at 5 in the morning, can you help me with this? Because they're not awake. And so it's true. you're probably going to keep the routine better. We've talked with our own runners about this on a number of occasions. When an athlete is having a really hard time fitting the run into the time that I'm trying to reserve for it in the afternoon or evening, especially if that individual has family members, is not living alone, then we often will encourage that person to try a morning schedule instead, and it tends to be quite a bit more consistent, more stable. So that's good. How about the last one? Number 4, morning exercise is better, slightly better, for building strength. In other words, like increasing your muscle contraction and muscle contraction rate types of things. And so we're talking about adaptation, not about in the moment you're not stronger, but greater adaptation as a result of. And why is that? Well, on the one side, it's probably hormones again, because for all people, your hormone balance shifts throughout the day. And it shifts in a couple of different ways, but one in particular seems to be, based on studies, that people have a little bit higher level of testosterone in the morning than they do in the afternoon, relative to yourself. Obviously, it's not compared to other people, but every individual seems to, for the most part, have a slight dip in testosterone levels relative to other hormones in your system throughout the day. And so when the testosterone's highest, it's best for things like muscle building. There are other things going on with hormones that are just really quite incredible. And when it comes down to it, I don't see enough studies yet on the topic to draw more conclusions, but I'm intrigued. So how about afternoon exercise? Because a lot of you listening right now are saying, I hate it. Don't make me run in the morning. I don't like it. And there are reasons to run in the afternoon as well. And among them are the top 3 Daniel Pink shares. 1, avoiding injury. And the reason why that seems to be the case is because in the afternoon you have a higher body temperature and better lung function. And so you're getting more oxygen to your muscles are warmer, and which means that they can move without as much stress and strain. And that's a good thing. And then the next one is performance, which relates very closely to that. I should mention this, the afternoon injury avoidance one. I don't see a lot of hard data that show, yes, for sure that happens, but it should be the case is the thinking there because of those things. And then performance is another one. And it is simply true that we tend to be able to perform better in the afternoon in terms of like maximum performance potential. Lung function is better. Circulation is better. Your body temperature is a little bit higher, which it tends to be helpful when, especially when you're starting performance. Obviously, you don't want to have a higher body temperature in the second half of a marathon, but that's a different question. They also found that Olympic records, more of them are set in the afternoon or evening than in the morning. And lastly, people tend to enjoy it more. Overall, people who exercise in the afternoon report higher levels of satisfaction and enjoyment with their exercise. Why? Well, it could be because it's less effortful, because it is a little bit easier to exercise in the afternoon because of those things shared above. Could be that it's a kind of stress relief. And so even though it's harder to keep to the routine, when we are able to exercise in the afternoon, we get that mood boost, the dopamine release, we get the hormone injections that happen naturally in our bodies, and those things make us feel better about whatever difficulties we were experiencing during the day. And that's not a bad thing. And so if you had an especially stressful day, that afternoon exercise can really help you cope well. And what that tells me too is it should be a tool, a resource to us as well when we have situations where we need to make a decision about exercise in the morning or the afternoon. Being able to leverage some of these reasons can help me really make sure that I'm doing the thing that produces the best possible experience for me in multiple domains, for my health, for my sanity, for my interest and enjoyment, all of the above. So there you have it. Daniel Pink, once again, sharing some really good information. He does it quite concisely. I think I spent like 10 times longer on the topic than he did in his video. So if you're interested, you can find that on YouTube, and certainly you're welcome to read his book, which gives you a whole lot more on the topic. The book is called When. So there you have it. That's all we've got for today. And as we near the holidays nearer, we'll be sharing a few more things with you here in the next couple of weeks. And so we'll still be on air. You can find us when you are going out for a holiday jog and you're looking for the festive run and you want to have some running talk in your ears, we'll be there. We'll be sharing things. And make sure that if you want the articles that we're publishing here in the near future, subscribe by going to atozrunning.com/subscribe, or just look for the word follow on the website. Thanks again for joining us, and we will talk to you next week.